Greetings, this is Doc Ock coming to you live today. Yes, well, we are coming to the end of a 400-part series, 400 plus. Okay, this is, we did our 401st live stream yesterday, and we're going to do a few more. We're going to do them all the way until the end of November. November 30th will be our last day for the year. And then we're going to go on a hiatus for a month. But we will be back January 1st. In the meanwhile, we'll put up some other videos that you may not have seen before in place of our live stream. We're going to take you on a little tour of the world. That's right. So we'll do a world tour in the meantime, and we're gonna have some special live streams we'll do for Kwanzaa. Well, they won't exactly be live streams, but there will be something in this space. So continue, hold the time, keep coming black, and you're gonna see some more good stuff, and that's a fact. All right, now proverb for the day. He who diggeth the pit shall fall in it. He who diggeth the pit shall fall in it. Now, that's a proverb from the Bible. I got it from Bob Marley, but it's a good one yet and still. He who diggeth the pit shall fall in it. Think about it. Don't stink about it. Moving on to our poem for the day, by our featured poet of the month, Eugene Redmond. Mr. Eugene Redmond. Here we go. Again. It's the title of this poem. Again. On the raceway of the struggle, I surge again out of myself, throttled open, hope open, as starting blocks tremble, fall away, and crumble in cinders of dry sweat, in the ashes of an energy resurrected by that old time religion, deathless love. In the stretch where artificial respiration will not work, I call on the grand passions, grand myths to make me over and over, to catapult me to the next insurrection, the next erection of the soul, where Nat Turner broods in a basement Bastille. In the stretch, I hurl back the yawns, the bores, and reptile hiss of rhetoric, and the grief-shuttling gossip, and the knives drilled systematically into my back by slower runners of the race, and by referees, moving on the raceway of the struggle, against the thoroughbreds of oppression, against the quarter horses of the king, where lights grow dim in white houses. I insist. When midnight cackles at the sun, I insist. When gold boggles and dazzles, I rarefy love, and cuddling hope carry a bolt of lightning in my hand. Again, by Eugene Redmond, from his collection of poems, The Eye in the Ceiling. The Eye in the Ceiling. Now, yesterday we were reading about our foray into the South in Tuskegee, Alabama. And I think I can read this without my glasses today. Actually, I don't need the glasses. And we left off where he was talking about Dr. Walker and his wife, and how they were highly regarded members of Tuskegee's supposed upper crust, which proceeded from the fact that Mrs. Walker was the sister, not the daughter, but the sister of Dr. Rufus Early Clement, president of Atlanta U. And in it, he talks about Dr. Clement. The Walkers held soirees in their garden, backyard in Cleveland among the underclass, where recently published books or Broadway plays were discussed. Items they or others may have read or seen, such as Ossie Davis's Pearly Victorious, which had opened recently on Broadway in 1961. This play was Davis's last play, made into the 1963 film Gone Are the Days, and which included all of the original Broadway cast: Ruby Dee, Alan Alda, B. Richards, and Godfrey Cambridge. Wow, that's star-studded right there. Another example of Tuskegee's haute culture, in other words, Negro riche, high culture, quote unquote, a social attitude often displayed by Black people who have gained in reality a small portion of respect and who now imitate their illusory, fallacious concept of white society. It was this nose in the air attitude my wife and I found embedded in many at Tuskegee. For example, I had the opportunity to witness this when I and other faculty in the English and Languages department were invited to dinner at the home of a faculty member whose husband happened to be the chief radiologist at Tuskegee's Veterans Administration Hospital. They lived on Bibb Street, where Tuskegee Institute's hoity-toity dwelled. When I arrived, a young man in a waiter's uniform, red coat, black pants, and white gloves met me at the door, ushered me into the dining room, where I was greeted by other faculty members. The most impressive sight came when a number of young men, also dressed in red, black, and white, began lighting the cigarettes of smokers and bringing drinks or beverage to those who requested them. This display didn't stop there, however. Dinner was served soon after everyone had gathered, at which time I noticed in a corner of the dining room another red, black, and white clad man cutting slices from the two large roasts of beef and ham. I was alone in marveling at this ostentatious spectacle. The other guests took all of this in stride, for they had no doubt attended such pretentious upper-class dining displays previously. When my family and I arrived at Tuskegee Institute in June 1962, we learned the Institute had been rendered a city called Tuskegee Institute, Alabama. Still within Macon County, but no longer within the city limits of Tuskegee ever since 1957, 6 years before I was hired, and had been referred to as Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, as a consequence of its having been distinctly separate from the city of Tuskegee, Alabama, with its own post office and its own zip code. When we got there, Tuskegee Institute was still reeling from the Tuskegee municipal gerrymandering case, which arose as a result of the state of Alabama's redrawing the town of Tuskegee's boundaries to exclude all Black folks. Redrawing the town of Tuskegee's boundaries to exclude all Black people, save very few who geographically couldn't be gerrymandered out. Having done so, Tuskegee Institute had become a city unto itself. However, that distinction didn't last very long. Senator Sam Engelhardt, who was also executive director of the White Citizens Council of Alabama. You can read that as another version of the KKK. And Tuskegee's mayor, Phil Lightfoot, were disturbed by the large numbers of black citizens who had attempted to and succeeded in registering to vote in the city. Black people, from laborers to PhD, had been waiting all day, day after day, week after week, to register to vote. This voter registration activity caused Tuskegee's officials to petition the state of Alabama to introduce a bill that would effectively gerrymander all black folks residing in and around Tuskegee Institute out of the city, which would prevent them from voting in municipal elections and hold up against any court challenge. This strategy might have been successful had the blacks who were evicted, quote unquote, from the city not boycotted all business establishments in the city as they sought redress in federal courts. Their concentrated voter registration drive and the boycott that followed the gerrymander bill was led by Professor Charles Good Gomillion, head of Tuskegee's Poli-Sci Department and founder of the Tuskegee Civic Association, the TC, otherwise known as the TCA. The conflict, Gomillion versus Lightfoot, which was the mayor of Tuskegee, Alabama, that ensued was calmly conducted, something not usually associated with black versus white South during the era of civil rights struggles. Another unusual circumstance was Charles Gomillion's, and therefore black Alabama's having won out over Senator Englehart, the White Citizens Council, and Mayor Phil Lightfoot in 1960, 2 years before my family and I arrived. Soon after arriving, Shirley and I discovered our furniture and other belongings had not yet. Thankfully, we formed. Thankfully, we were informed the Institute had its own guest house, Dorothy Hall. It was a very comfortable facility that also served in its dining room breakfast, lunch, and dinner. On the downside, since Dorothy Hall was not air conditioned and the outside temperature was in the 90s daily, we had to open the 2 windows in our room, which invited the mosquitoes in. We learned during the daylight hours when the temperature was at its highest, the mosquitoes were not pernicious. However, when the sun had set, the bloodthirsty mosquitoes would invade our room through its wide open doors. Like vampires, they came out in the night. On our first morning in Dorothy Hall, we assumed the hall offered some, if not all, the amenities standard for hotels, and called the desk to order coffee and donuts. These items were quickly delivered. We were so pleased with the service, we ordered the same thing the next day. Again, our order was quickly delivered. That evening, we ate dinner downstairs and decided to let the desk know we wanted our order of coffee and donuts sent up to our room in the morning. The lady at the desk exclaimed, "Oh, so y'all the people in room 236? We answered yes, and thought no more about it until the next morning when the coffee and donuts were not delivered, even after we had called down to repeat the order in case they had forgotten. Finally, it dawned on us that the desk clerk's exclamation, "Oh, so y'all the people in that room," happened because she or another clerk on duty had thought we were white. Now that they knew we were black, there was no longer any need to continue that kind of service. Those services apparently were reserved for white folks. After 4 or 5 days at Dorothy Hall, our goods finally arrived, and we were able to move into our moderately sized home at 613 Roberts Circle. The home was a standalone, solid brick bungalow with 2 bedrooms, a sizable kitchen, and comfortable living room and side veranda. It had everything except air conditioning, which forced us to immediately travel to Montgomery to purchase a relatively large unit that would fit in the kitchen window and cool the entire bungalow. That accomplished, we settled down to place the carpets we had brought, only to discover the corners throughout the apartment were not squared, and we would have had to cut our carpets to make them fit. Shirley and I settled the situation, deciding not to cut the carpets to fit the rooms. We said to each other, we might not stay in this apartment long, thinking we would look around after we got our bearings and find a better place, somewhere with square corners. We stayed in Roberts Circle for almost a full year before we realized we had not received any notices about rent payments. I hurried to the bursar's office to correct this oversight, only to discover the bursar was completely unaware we were living in Roberts Circle. The bursar hadn't made any note of our occupancy, even though we had to go to his office to receive the keys to our bungalow to allow the moving van driver to unload our furniture and goods. Incidents like these began to mount and caused Shirley and I to become skeptical of the decision we had made to stake out our professional claim in Alabama. We put these incidents to the side and committed ourselves to the work we'd come to Tuskegee Institute to accomplish. In my case, to teach German and Spanish, and in hers, to make a comfortable home for us and our son, Michael. When we left the University of Kansas, we were 3. Upon our arrival in Alabama, Shirley was scheduled to deliver our second son, Daryl, in August. Our first item of business after settling into our home was to find a pediatrician at the John Andrews Hospital that was on the Tuskegee Institute campus, a short distance from Roberts Circle. Shirley was pleased to find a hospital and professional pediatric assistants so close. She and I were anxious given Alabama's segregation practices. We remembered Edward Albee's 1959 one-act play, The Death of Bessie Smith, the Empress of the Blues, in which he states inaccurately, Bessie had died as a result of having been refused admission to a whites-only hospital in Clarksdale, Mississippi. As it turned out, our second son, Daryl Crosby, was safely born on August 31st, 1963, in John A. Andrews Hospital on the historic Tuskegee Institute campus and in Tuskegee, Alabama proper. Now, here's the thing, because we're going to break off right there. 2 things. Number 1, we talked about something a little earlier here. Oh, there were 2 things. Number 1 was the gerrymandering. Okay, this kind of gerrymandering that he talked about here, where somebody had a map and they drew the map like this right here. This is the map of Tuskegee, Alabama. Now you see that thing area in the middle that looks like looks kind of like an arrow. It jets all the way up there like that. That's Tuskegee. Tuskegee Institute is over here, I believe. That's Tuskegee Institute. I'm trying to read it backwards. Tuskegee Institute is outside of Tuskegee, Alabama. Notice this part over here that just kind of juts out into the middle of nowhere. Okay. Apparently there were some white folks over there they wanted to include. But there are also some black folks over there they wanted to exclude. This is what you call gerrymandering. Why do they call it that? Because when you get done, it ends up that your city, your town, your village, whatever district it is that you're in charge of, ends up being drawn as if it was a salamander, but they call it a gerrymander. In other words, it's all curled up around, could look like a dragon or some other kind of weird shape. They have different shapes. And so this is basically the same thing that I found here in Ohio in the 1970s, 1979 to be exact, that the black people in and around the town of Ravenna, Ohio, had been gerrymandered out of the city. In other words, you had the city of Ravenna that got city services, police, fire, and medical care, whatever it was, but emergency care. So they had those three in the city of Ravenna: water, electricity, trash pickup, okay, all those kind of things. You had that in the city of Ravenna. But outside the city of Ravenna, in what it would be Portage County, you had none of that. So you could literally die to death. You could die. You could bleed to death in your front yard for want of an ambulance, police service, any kind of EMTs or anything like that within a mile of the local hospital, because the hospital happened to be out in the county as opposed to in the city of Ravenna. But these services did not exist. So what would people do? City contractors would go to Skills or McElrath and dump their goods, things that they ripped out of people's walls. If they were doing a flood abatement, when they rip the walls and all those other things out of there that are all soaked and everything, and they're going to get mold, etc., they just take that stuff and just dump it in a vacant lot in Skills or McElrath. That was a dumping ground. Where would the people put their trash since they weren't getting trash pickup? They would also dump their trash in that same vacant lot. Where would they put their old beat up cars? Dump it on those vacant lots. And so this situation that we're talking about here in Tuskegee, Alabama, was not relegated just to the South. This is something that was found you can find it anywhere in the country. Happened all the time, these kinds of situations. And then the second one was the hospital. Okay, that same hospital that we're talking about here, that my younger brother was born in, is the same hospital that is infamous for the Tuskegee experiment. We call it Tuskegee 626. Type it, Google that, and go to it'll take you to YouTube, and you can hear the song by Gil Scott-Heron. He just alludes to it. He doesn't really tell you the details of it, but it speaks to the abuse of black people by doctors, knowing abuse. It was knowing, and it was systematic. It was not one doctor didn't like some black guy and he didn't treat him right. This was something that was done over a period of 30 years, a unauthorized experiment, something where they didn't give they didn't give notice to the people that were being experimented on that they were in an experiment. They had no idea they were in an experiment. They died, many of them, without ever knowing they were in an experiment. What they die of? Syphilis. Was there a known treatment for syphilis that was effective? Yes, it's called penicillin. Something that you go to the doctor now and they give it out they used to, at least. They used to give it out on a regular basis. Just give you a shot of penicillin. You could get over the syphilis and move on with your life. Instead, they wanted to see what happened in the last stages of syphilis. And so therefore, these people were not given the treatment. They were turned into what's known in the scientific world as a control group, or experimental group. Actually, they would be the experimental group, because the experimental group they do not they have to deal with whatever the experimental the premise of the experiment is. That's the part that that is dealt with them. Okay, you have to. It's kind of hard for me to talk about that part further than what I plan to, but put it this way: they were the ones who didn't get the treatment. The people who would get the treatment were part of another group, although none of them knew that this experiment was going on. And the experiment went on all the way up into the late 70s, maybe the early 80s. It was still going on. So this is something that started back in the 30s or 40s and went all the way through for years and years and years and years. So when you hear people talking about giving you a vaccine that's not been tested on a long-term basis, in other words, 30 years or more, because oftentimes it takes that long to determine what the actual consequences are of these drugs, because it will be a drug. It's no wonder that Black folks look at it with a very questioning eye, because even without knowing about Tuskegee 626, we know of plenty of instances where doctors have abused us and or our relatives, or have attempted to do so. So we'll see what happens with this COVID-19 vaccine. I'm not going to say what I'm going to do, but just suffice it to say, my mother gave me good sense, and I'd advise you to function. What's the word for it? Proceed with caution. Proceed with caution. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're way over our time. We're moving into the half-hour territory here. We don't usually go this long, but I did want to make sure I included that addendum about the city of Tuskegee and the gerrymandering, as well as, because that gerrymandering is still going on too, as well as the experimental treatment of Black folks by doctors. All right, so we're going to cut this off short. Today is a day off for a lot of you, so have a good day off, and we'll be Black tonight at 9 as usual. Peace out without a doubt. This is Doc Ock signing off.